The Saint Mort Show.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Saint Mort Show. Today my guest is Kulap Vilaysack, who has this amazing documentary that is up on Indiegogo right now, looking for your donations. Help make this a reality. It's called Origin Story. Kulap, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm a big podcast fan. I've been podcasting for years, but stuff like Doug Loves Movies and Comedy Bang Bang and Who Chart It and pretty much everything that Earwolf has their hands in has been a big influence on me as a podcaster. And when I heard you talk about this documentary on Doug Loves Movies a few weeks ago, I immediately checked out the video and was just like, I want to help this project any way I can. As a fan of documentaries, and as a fan of documentaries that seems like this one will be very similar to another documentary I loved called Young at Heart, I feel like there's going to be those moments where you're going to be laughing, and then other moments where you're going to be crying, and I think that that's a sign of a really good documentary, is one that can use reality to push you through all these different emotions. So I'm insanely excited to see the final product of this.
I mean, that's a relief to me that is my hope, that's my desire. And I was a little worried that the trailer you're speaking of, or the teaser that you're talking about, like, that there's pretty much no comedy in that. And I was like, I really hope people know that it will be both. So that makes me happy that you know that.
To be honest, even though there's no comedy in that trailer, A, your background, and B, in all honesty, if there wasn't comedy in that movie or in that documentary, I feel like there'd be a point where you'd be like, oh my god, I just want to cut my wrists. This is so sad. Like it seems like it's such an emotional journey that you're gonna need some type of relief to keep people from just sitting in a theater crying for an hour and a half.
You're also basically speaking of my general state of being.
And I think that that's the draw of a lot of comedy. I think that there is it's not that you don't have to throw a rock in a comedy club to find a comedian who uses comedy to deal with, emotional issues. And I think that that's why comedy's so important in so many ways, is that if you can't laugh at certain elements of your life or find humor in certain elements of your life, life's really difficult.
Yeah.
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 I know when we were first trying to put this together, I actually told you a story about your husband, Scott, that he did what is to this day one of the nicest things a total stranger had ever done for another total stranger. Was that it was getting close to the 10-year anniversary that my grandfather had died. And I was really close with my grandfather, and I was listening to an episode of Comedy Bang Bang, and he played this song by Benny Bell called Everybody Wants to Touch My Fanny. And my grandfather got me in, like, when I was a kid, he would make me these cassette tapes of Spike Jones and Benny Bell and all these, like, great comedy songs from the 30s. And I heard that, and it, like, sparked this memory in me that I had forgotten about that song for years. And I just sent a general email. I think I posted on the Comedy Bang Bang Facebook page or tracked down his personal Facebook page or something. I was like, I need this song. And I told him the whole story, and then he just said, send me your email, and I'll send you all the Benny Bell I have. And I was like, that is, like, the nicest. Like, there was no reason for him to have to do that beyond the fact that he's just a good guy.
That I love that. I love that story, and it just, like, I hear those stories, and I already know it, but it just sort of, like, for me, reaffirms that I'm, just how great my partner is, like, it really it's just always nice to hear stories like this. Makes me feel really good about, my life choices.
Let's go into your origin story, both the documentary and the reality of it. What brought you into the comedy world in the first place?
I think, let's see, I suppose I just always felt different. That typical story. A comedian felt different growing up, and for me, being Asian American, immigrant parents, growing up in the suburbs of Minnesota with a very odd name, I felt super different. And humor was how I could relate to my parents and to people at school. And I think that led to, I think it was like speech. Like a English teacher of mine was like, you'd be really good in you should do speech. And I did humorous interpretation, if you want to hear it said long. I did that for a while. That led to doing some theater where I would only play comedic roles. And then I kind of was like, okay, well, now I'm 18. It's time to get out of Minnesota. Well, what are you going to do? You're not good at anything. You like fashion. I think you got a business mind. Oh, okay. Go someplace that teaches fashion business. So I ended up in LA at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising. Pretty soon realized that wasn't the perfect fit, but it succeeded in the sense of getting me to California and away from all the responsibilities of my family. And then I started going to Second City, Los Angeles. And Second City, Los Angeles led to the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in Los Angeles. And that's it. I mean, I remember I was in this amazing casting director's office, Allison Jones, auditioning for The Office. And when she came and got me in the waiting room, she was like, oh, yeah, you're a UCB girl. And that was my first gig.
I think that's just... I've talked about this on the podcast with a couple guests recently, and I guess it's because it's a nostalgic thing that's been on my mind lately. But I've been really obsessed with that idea and that moment, I guess, when everything kind of clicks in your brain. Be it like that moment where you're doing a bunch of different stuff, and all of a sudden you do that one thing where you're like, oh my God, this is it. Like, this is the thing that I need to do every single day or I'll never be happy. Or that moment that you meet someone who's into the same weird thing that you thought that you were completely alone in liking, and having that moment of like, oh my God, I'm not alone in this. Like, there are other people that care about these things.
Yep.
There's
other people like me.
Great feeling to have, where you're like, oh my God, people care about comedy the way I do, or people care about horror movies the way I do, or whatever, video games the way I do, or something where every male grew up liking video games or liking horror movies, but like when you find that person where it's not just like, oh yeah, I like to go to see horror movies, it's like, no, I need to have every movie and I need to memorize these films and track down the rare ones. You're like, oh, I'm not the only person that does that. And I always see...
and it's weird because it's like I mean, this is being a little harsh, but I'm just like, but I'm just thinking of it in terms of my life too. It's like, oh wow, we have the same mental illness, cool. Oh, wow, your anxieties are the same as mine, and you have the same obsessions and compulsions?
I actually just had that moment recently when I was talking to someone at a concert, and we found out that we both came up with the same solution to our anxieties. I couldn't sleep at night.
What were they?
I didn't have anxieties during the day, but when I would go to bed at night, it was like the second I closed my eyes, my brain would just open up some file of something I did wrong 20 years ago. And be like, oh, remember when you did this? You're a terrible person. And then I couldn't sleep for the whole night. And the solution that I came up with, since I didn't have any health care and couldn't afford to see a therapist, was, all right, well, I need distraction. And I have like 2,000 DVDs in the basement, and a bunch of them have commentary tracks, so I just have worked my way alphabetically through my entire DVD collection on commentary tracks at night. So I'm listening to something else, and it's kind of distracting me from thinking. And that person that I was talking to at this concert had the exact same thought process of like, yeah, I figured out if I just listened to DVD commentary tracks at night, I wouldn't think about every terrible thing I did when I was 5.
Yeah, that's specific.
But it's definitely cool, those moments that you relate.
Yes. I think that's all we want to do, really. Like, okay, we do a lot of things so that, because we want to be different, but ultimately we want community, and within a community that we choose.
I think that's what makes a bond of a friendship so incredible sometimes. When you look at, like, throughout, like, all, I've only been on this earth for about 30 years, but over those 30 years, I've had my ebbs and flows with friendships. And like, you get to that point where you're like, around the late 20s, early 30s, where you start to go, okay, these are the ones that were worth it. Like, these are the ones that stuck around through all the crazy times. And, and you stop feeling bad about the ones that kind of just became acquaintances, because you're like, if they were meant to be as close as these people are, they would be. Now, did you meet...
Yeah. I think there's a desire at that age. I'm 34, and right around 29, 30, I was like, there's a desire for, I think, a greater intimacy.
I think that's the best way to describe it. A greater intimacy is like the best way to describe it.
Because, like, we basically are, I think it's around that time, some people would say that's when your Saturn returns. Some people would say stop saying that. But that's when you really kind of step out of the sandbox, because it's like, there's this, when you're in the sandbox and you have, middle school, high school, college, like, where you're like drinking and you're just like buddies. But then I think around 29, 30, 31, you're like, I feel like I'm changing, and I don't know, I'm certainly growing. It's a different chapter in my life. Are my friends, are we running parallel here? Do our interests and do we sync? And have we changed so much that our friendship has sustained it, or is it not working? I think it's pretty common.
I always think of is about 3 years ago, I briefly lived in Los Angeles, and it wasn't for me. But while I was out there, my friend from college was getting married, and I couldn't afford to fly back home for the wedding. So they set up a laptop at one of the tables, and I Skyped into the wedding. And it was like, there is no way in hell I would have been as close to the people that I met in high school that I would be like, oh yeah, I'll Skype into your wedding, as I was with this group of people. Like, that's...
Yeah.
That to me, the fact that they were like, no, we don't care how ridiculous it seems to everybody else at that wedding, like, you need to be there in some way. You know what I mean? Like, that's we had a friend who lived in Japan for 3 years, and every time that we had even just a get-together, she would put some time in her day to Skype in from Japan to join us. Like, either first thing in the morning or when she was going to bed. I don't know what the time difference was, but I just remember she was always in her pajamas.
Right.
But it was like, that's like, those were those moments where I'm like, this is the type of friendship that lasts for years, because distance doesn't even become a factor in the friendship. And that's kind of cool. Did you meet, so back into your story though, did you meet Scott around that time when you were in the UCB, or was it a little bit later?
Oh, no, it was earlier. We've been together for a very long time. I met Scott. So I mentioned that I'm 34 now. I met him when I was 18 years old. And we started dating when I was 19. So, Yeah, yeah. I mean, he has witnessed tremendous life changes and transformations in me. I certainly have in him too, but I would say, I mean, it was a little, I'm sure for him, a little like boyhood, but with like his girlfriend.
He should have documented about 10 minutes of every year of the relationship and had Richard Linklater release it in theaters.
I mean, hindsight is 20/20. Too late to start,
so they can release it when you're 50. But,
seriously, that's true.
It'll be the follow-up to Origin Story.
I'll pitch it to him. yeah.
The sequel, 16 years in the making.
Yeah.
So what was it that drew you to Scott all the way back then?
Well, what was it? So I met him, my roommate knew his writing partner at the time, she took me to a taping of a show Scott wrote on HBO's Mr. Show. And I had no idea what Mr. Show was. Saw it and was like, what is this amazing, wondrous, hilarious thing? But we didn't date. I mean, I think within the year that we didn't date, we went and saw a movie with like it wasn't just me and him. It was with me, him, and another person. We saw Blade. And then we started dating right after I turned 19. He's hilarious. We both love Prince.
That's really all you need. I hope that pretty much was the wedding vows. Like you walked up there and you're just like, he's funny and he likes Prince. Will you be my husband?
Yeah. 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 I should have said that. I regret everything now.
See, you missed out on good wedding vows. You missed out on good documentary.
I know. A lot of losses in this conversation. I don't know. It's hard to say what it was back then because I just feel like inherently I'm the same. I guess on a DNA level I'm the same, but I just feel like I've just grown so much. It's hard for me to think back to what was like the first thing.
I feel like for me, I can't imagine that the person I am now would be friends with the person I was at 18. Like, I actually think the person that was 18 would be super judgmental of the person I am now more than anything. But
yeah. Yeah, that's true. Although I sound like a curmudgeon when I'm just like, oh, millennials. Like that means that teens. Oh, those teens scare me. Teens, and then what? I think my younger sisters were just like, "Would you stop with repeating that your brain isn't fully formed until you're 24?" Like, okay, we know. I'm just saying, it's like your brain isn't fully formed.
I don't think you get what I'm trying to explain here.
Yeah, like, so, I don't think you heard me.
Except slightly louder.
Yeah. How about in this voice?
You appeared in a bunch of shows. I was looking at it was one of those things where, I first heard you through Who Charted. And, your appearances on Doug Loves Movies and stuff like that. And then as I prepared for this, I went on your IMDb page, and, you were in a ton of shit. And I mean that in a positive way. I'm not calling the actual thing shit. Like, you were in a bunch of stuff, and that's awesome.
Yeah. Good stuff, too.
You were in...
Really good stuff.
You're in, I Love You Man and The Office and all that stuff, and I just think it's cool to be able to say that you were in all these really cool and popular projects. Although I really appreciate that your first credit is gay female military type number 2 in Run Ronnie Run. That is an excellent credit to have on the resume.
Oh yeah, there's that. There's quite a few prostitutes on there.
Mr. Show to at least get you to gay female military type number 1.
Nope. We're really in our dating.
It's like I don't love her. I don't know if I love her enough to make her number 1 just yet.
Yeah. Hey, no man, I remember like I think all of Scott's friends who are much older that Scott's 10 years older than I am, and his friends were like usually like 10 years older than he was. Like he was the baby in his in the Mr. Show kind of universe. And I know when I would come around, like they just did not know what to make of me, and I didn't know. I was so sheepish and didn't know how to be a human around them because I just was like, oh my god, Bob Odenkirk, Dave Cross, like it took me. I feel like Doug, you mentioned Doug. Dougie's known me, since then, and I think it really took me like 5 or 6 years to actually be Kulap around them because I just was like, I can't talk.
My LA experience was just like I was like the camera guy on a video podcast called Geekscape when I was out there, and I remember like having Paul Scheer on the show and Garfunkel and Oates, and just being the first thing I told Kate Micucci when I met her was how she asked to be on a concert that I was throwing, and I said no. Like 5 years earlier, I'm like, why is that the opening to meeting someone that you like? It's like, hey, I rejected you once.
Oof.
Yeah. And I remember I had to, as soon as I said that, I had to backpedal and be like, well, you were just like this person playing ukulele in the Philadelphia region, and it was all hardcore bands at the time, and I was like, don't murder this girl. But, I started off on a terrible note, and then I was like, I can't meet people that are moderately famous ever, because I start to put the ketchup and mustard on my foot and start sticking it right into the mouth.
Oh, God, yeah, it took me, I love Los Angeles now, it took me a long time to just kind of be okay with where I'm at and okay with, I can take up space in a room when I enter it, and that's ridiculous to say, but, for a long time, I really think that I didn't believe that, and would act accordingly and be really concerned with what I was saying, which meant I wasn't really listening or very present, trying to control how people thought of me. And that was a lot of energy expended. And, I contributed because, hey, the brain isn't fully formed until you're 24.
Delightful callback. That was a masterful callback.
Okay, this is a fun story. Scott, we went to Vancouver for the first time. It was the first time that Scott had ever gone out of the country, and he really just dropped the ball in getting his passport. So he was just gonna wing it. This is, we're living in a post 9/11 world. He, of course, wasn't allowed to get on the plane with me to go to Vancouver because he didn't have the right paperwork. He didn't have his passport. So he had to drive across the border through Seattle. Meanwhile, I went on a flight with Bob Odenkirk, and there was a plan for a group of comedians. We were all going up there for a comedy festival to let's ride bikes around Stanley Park. It's like, oh yeah, everybody. Okay, great, we're gonna do it. We get to the hotel. Bob's like, all right, let's meet. Let's get everybody. Let's go. And everyone bailed. So it was just me and Bob Odenkirk riding bikes around Stanley Park. And I'm completely oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. I've never been alone with Bob like this, much less riding bikes. And we were getting lunch, and he was talking to me about marriage and asking me questions, and we were like, oh, okay, we're at the restaurant, we're looking at stuff to order, and I was kind of telling him, there was a time when Scott and I were together and I was so young, and then we split up for like a year, and now we're back together and stronger than ever. And I just really feel like, I grew up a lot and we're on level playing ground. And he was like, yeah, no, cool up. Yeah, like you're doing your own thing. And it's like before, like, I mean, you were just like a girl that someone would date, and now you're like a real person. Hey, do you want to split macaroni and cheese? And I was like, oh, and like it hit me, but I was like, kind of back to what I was saying about not knowing how to act like a person around them. It was hard to hear, but like I got it. I understood. Like, yeah, I know why he's saying that.
And I think that for me, there's a lyric in of all things, a Christian rap song. Because I used to be I was like a Bible study kid until college. But there's a song lyric that I always connect it with. Because I actually had my favorite band from my Christian days on the podcast. It was the last episode of the podcast. And it was a very surreal thing to interview them because half the members are atheists now. Which I've learned is kind of this weird... Yeah, it's kind of this weird thing where...
Wow.
Yeah, well, I've realized
swung the other
in
way.
retrospect that even when I was really into religion, I always went for the bands that kind of wrote more dark and reality-based stuff. Like, it wasn't always like, hey, God makes life great. Like, it was always like, no, even if you become a Christian, family members will still die and life could be really shitty. And this one lyric that I, to this day, still love was from this rapper named John Rubin. And the line was, I'm in a room with a million familiar faces, but no one really knows me. And I was like, holy... Like, I remember being like 15 and being like, oh man, I know what he's talking about. And now I'm like, no, now I really know what he's talking about. Like, you have those moments and it doesn't stop. Like you get more comfortable in your skin. You know what I mean? But I'm serious. Like, you get more comfortable in your skin, but like you still find yourself in those like emo-y moments in life where you're like, I know everybody in this room and I don't know if they know me. Okay. And I think like you said, like we want this intimacy, but I think that there's also that part that we're still afraid to be completely 100% open with the people that we want to be most intimate with sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much about trust. So much about like wanting to be seen a certain way. I think.
I think that you're right.
There's
that
desire.
That point where, if you're that person that everyone goes to for advice, that you feel like, well, I'm not allowed to go to anyone else for advice then, because then I lose that image of the advice giver, or you know what I mean, like the person that makes everyone laugh. Like, you're not allowed to show that you can be sad because you're the person that always cheers people up. Like, it's very weird.
Yeah, but then again, back to that intimacy, is that it sort of flows both ways, There's a balance. Like, when I'm friends with you, I come to you, and you come to me, and it's shared, it's not one-sided. Because especially, like, I used to be that person that, everyone came to me for advice, but, just being in that position, I realized just how, like, bossy and judgmental I was too, of like, I'm speaking about myself personally, which is like, you should live your life like this. Like, I could hear myself say that, and it's like, but like, just ask me how I felt at the time, and I wouldn't know. I didn't know, because I didn't know. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, being those moments, which I still do sometimes feel like, oh, no one knows me in my like lowest moments, but in my 20s, pretty much up until I was like 30, to be honest, it's like I didn't even know me. I didn't know, and I didn't really look until then, to be honest.
Yeah,
like really look.
This podcast has definitely taken a really strange turn that I don't think either one of us thought that this is what the show would be about. But I'm okay with it. But now I'm just like, I kind of like this is not what two strangers promoting a documentary talk about.
We just
this is why I don't do any prep work, because I like not knowing what the conversation is going to be about. So let's go to the documentary now, because I think that's a good start. Sure. That good point to go to the beginning stories of this documentary, which started with a fight between your parents when you were 15. 14.
When I was 14. 14, yeah. Just growing up with immigrant parents was difficult for me. You live in two worlds. School is very much different than, the Lao-centric environment that I grew up in. On top of that, you have two parents who do not get along, who fight often. And that was like my home life was just sort of, bit of a constant sort of like powder keg. You just never knew when something would erupt. And when I was 14, my parents got in a huge fight. And I remember being in the family computer that was like in my parents' room, and my mom huffed in and was complaining about my dad. And I kind of just like made a comment that was in defense of him. And she looked at me and was like, "Why are you defending him? He's not your real dad." And I looked at her and I was like, "Okay, Mom, like this is another crazy thing Mom's saying, try to hurt me." And but then her face went from like blind anger to like fear. And so I like went out to my dad and I was like, "Mom's being crazy. She said this." And then he just went, his face, like I just knew it was true when I saw his face. And that's how I found out. And then later, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Like when I heard that the first time, I got such a chill, and not in the sense that like that is like one of the most awful ways that information can be found out. And all I could think of was how in my family, my dad had a fun game where when he wanted to fuck with me, he would play the game of guess who your real father is. And he would just think of whatever person I disliked the most and be like, well, he's really your father. And this was when I was like 3. Just to watch me get upset and be like, no, he's not.
God.
So like, I think about how I felt with something that like part of me kind of knew that he was lying back then. And I try to put myself in those shoes in that story. And I'm just like, when I was a kid, there was still that part of me that was like, he could be telling me the truth, that filled me with fear. So to have that 100% feeling of like everything that I know is different now, I like that. I think that's a huge portion of what drew me to this project.
And everybody I know, especially adults who I'm supposed to trust, they knew, and that that messed with me in ways that like it really, like I said, until I was kind of like 30, it was like really like, no, it's not okay. Everything's not okay, Kulap. Things are, they think about tamping things down and compartmentalizing. They're still there. It's a I think from that point on, I just kept making sort of like deposits into this like traumatic and just emotional deposits into this like bank account that had a really high interest rate, and then they manifest. They manifest in ways that like maybe it's not a direct line, but it's more direct than I think I could even have. I just didn't know. I mean, part of it is because your brain doesn't form until you're 24. I mean, that's the thing.
I can't believe that callback worked twice. As soon as you just start to say part of it's because your brain, I'm like, here it is. I already know what the punchline is going to be, and I'm so excited. So why do you think it took 20 years to be ready to look? Like, do you think that it was because, like you said, for up until about your 30s, you really didn't know who you were, really, or do you think it was just kind of the general fear, or like the ostrich syndrome of like, if I don't see it, it's not true?
Well, no, I think I always knew it was true. It was just like the thing about, like, okay, so that's how I found out about my real father, but, like, that's how I find out about a lot of things. It makes you not want to find things out. There's that. Another thing is, like, I've been in therapy for years. I remember my therapist saying, like, I was like, I don't know if I want to, why meet this, like, dad, Oh, because I had heard that he didn't want anything to do with me for fear that I wanted child support. So that's when, like, at 14, that was a couple months after I learned of his existence, that hurt me so much that I just put it to bed. I just buried it. And I remember it was like about a year ago, I was kind of talking about it with my therapist, or maybe it was a year and a half ago, and he was like, well, I don't know. I mean, he may be the best parent you have, since my relationship with my other parents were so bad, So I was like, oh, wow.
I don't know. I don't know if that's the most cheerful thing for a therapist to give out there.
Oh, it's not cheerful. We can agree. We can all agree it's not cheerful, but not untrue. Well, at that time, no spoilers, but no spoilies. But I think another element of it is, Scott and I want to have, we're trying to have a baby, and I just feel like I need to have peace with where I come from and know for myself and see for myself whom I come from. Because I'm pretty angry. I'm angry. And anger and sadness, I think, are, they hold hands. They're twins. I'm also sad, and I really, I'm not unlike a lot of people who have to sort of create their own model of what motherhood or parenthood will be, because the one that they were brought up in is not ideal. I certainly don't want to repeat most of what I was around, quite frankly. And I know that I'm going to bring stuff up and I'll make mistakes, but I just really think it's my personal responsibility to clear out as much of the noise as possible. And that's what this project is for me.
I think that's very brave that you're letting an audience follow that journey.
I don't think, left to my own devices, I think, it'd be another 20 years before I reached out to him. Left to, if I kept the same pace that I if history tells me anything. And also, there's so much information. I don't want to be alone in this.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And I can't even remember, like, without a record of it, it's hard for me to even believe that some of this stuff has happened.
That's, right there, that alone is kind of an interesting just pitch for the documentary in a weird way of just like, look, the stuff that we've taped, you need the actual proof to remind yourself it happened. It's your life. And I don't know, it's weird that you saying that kind of also makes me feel like, well, I gotta see this fucking documentary. like I gotta see what happens in this shit. Like this is there's some shit that's going down apparently. Spoilers.
Some shit that's going down. For me, it's like no spoilers, but trust is that's really what my takeaway is, like, to have intimacy, there needs to be trust, and I didn't grow up with a lot of trust or emotional. Well, in the beginning, I didn't have a lot of physical security or safety, and then emotional safety is non-existent, and so I wouldn't even sometimes I remember when I was younger, it was just like, I wouldn't even trust thoughts that I had, I'd go, am I lying? Am I trying to am I trying to be manipulative? Just based on what like my mom would say to me or my dad would say to me. And it's taken a long time to go, no, no. The thing you do where you walk away from a conversation, you're just like, I should have said this. Well, why did I apologize for that? I didn't have to apologize for that. Like that's what I have had to rewire. But yet there are moments when I'm just like, oh, okay, well, did that really happen? Or am I making that up so that I'm the victim? Like, I still have those conversations. And when something is like so raw, like what's happened in the last 6 months, it's just, I'm like, did I make that up? Or like, did I read into that?
Yeah, I've had those moments too, and I think that's like a normal thing for people, though, is that you question, like, you start to, I feel like the easiest person in the world to manipulate is yourself. Like, it is way too easy to always paint yourself as the victim, and to, like, I mean, I do it all the time, and I hate it about myself. You know what I mean? Like even though I know that I'm the one that screwed up, like, I'm still angry at the person. Like, I find some weird reason why it's someone else's fault. Like, oh, well, they should have never told me to drive there because, then I forgot to fill my gas tank, and now I'm just struggling to get to the next gas station. Like, just stupid stuff where it's like, no, I should have been responsible enough to put gas in my car. Like, and I mean, that's like the most minor version of it. But
I swing back. I mean, this is something I've really, another life lesson of just like really swinging between like, I'm the fucking shit. I'm so like, I'm fucking awesome. Everyone sucks to like, I'm a monster. I am a monster and I'm saving everybody from who I really am. Like, both of those things are the same in terms of like essentially hurting myself. Like, it's like two sides of the ego. It's like none is in reality. And it's a hard thing to kind of like, another thing about this documentary, and it's something that I really think about, is personal responsibility. And kind of really trying to like keep my eyes on my own paper, mind my side of the fence, because that's the only thing that I can control for the most part, or I can, actively try to improve, really. Like, it to me stems back to like being personally responsible, And my parents often, all their excuses for everything, and just like, I'd love to just hear where you take responsibility for your mistakes. And I rarely hear that.
So I guess here's my next question related to the documentary, and we'll try to move to a slightly lighter tone now. So is the documentary like, is the Indiegogo campaign right now, is the documentary mostly shot and this is for finishing touches, or do you still need to go out and so it's
yeah I would say it's about 80% shot. I did go to Laos. I spent 10 days there. I shot in Minnesota and easily did days in California. What I know we're going to need is sort of like, I'm reticent to spending more money until, we begin our editing. We know exactly what we need. And I envision that to be, just a couple more days, maybe a week max of shooting additional footage. But for the most part, yes, it's about raising money to finish the film. I self-finance basically up until this point.
What always scared me off from doing documentaries as a filmmaker is that I always wonder, like, how do you know when it's over? Like, do you know that you've definitely like it? Like, I guess this is weird, but because you're doing. Not only are you doing a documentary, but you're doing a documentary where you're the star of the documentary. So, like, did you find yourself in a situation where, as it was happening in your brain, you're just like, oh my God, this is the closing shot right here. Like, this is the end of the documentary. Or are you still not there yet?
Well, I'm still not sure how exactly we're going to end it, but it is a bit of like, this is a very heightened period of time in my life. I'm still kind of choosing the ending, but in my head, I still have like an idea of what it is. But it's, wearing both those hats, like I've been my own puppet master. Like for instance, like I was so uncomfortable when meeting my birth father, then, hours later, picking him up for a 15-hour road trip to where he's from. And to be in such close proximity to him, it was so uncomfortable. And you know whose idea that was? It was mine. It was mine. All of it. Like it's been a strange thing to sort of be the one sort of pushing myself in literally direction it's not natural.
The question is always brought up in any documentary of like, how much of an effect did the director have on its subject, and like in this case, the answer is probably 100% because you're directing a film about you, like you're making all these choices, and I mean, I'm sure that there had to have been a handful of choices where in your brain you were just like, I know that this will be good for the story. And that's so surreal to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's going to make for a really interesting documentary for sure, almost to the extent that like you could do a follow-up documentary about the mental anguish of making a documentary about yourself. But it is like I just think that that's so weird because you watch all these other documentaries where you wonder like, oh, I wonder how many times this director filmed with this person before they found the moment they wanted to sum that person up, and I guess you kind of go into it in a different light because you go into it and you kind of know where the camera is and what the placement is and how the shot's going to look. For the most part in advance, and it's very weird.
Yeah,
it's very weird to me, but I think it's cool. Is how the other people around you
plan. I mean, just as we were talking about, like we didn't plan for our conversation to go where it went. I mean, you can plan, but it's like unless you're speaking in a mirror.
If the documentary just stars you know what I mean,
like and that. I mean, come on! I switch it to black and white. Sundance, baby.
The sad.
Come on.
The sad thing is that might go all the way to Cannes. They love that artsy-fartsy shit.
I mean, I guess it's not too
talk
late.
in your normal
I have a plan right now.
Weird foreign subtitles at the bottom for no explainable reason. And then just end with like a David Lynch twist for no explainable reason and done.
Yeah. Done. Can me a check. Come on.
So,
what's the big deal?
So, beyond the documentary and all the comedy stuff, you were also the co-host of Who Charted, and that podcast has been around for a good couple years now. What's it up to? 3 or 4?
I think we're in December. We're coming at 3 or maybe 4.
I hope that's what the episode is called. Our 3rd or 4th year anniversary.
Wait, but okay, because we're coming up on 200.
Okay, well that might make it easier.
We've never
for you.
missed a week.
I'm getting close to 100 episodes, but I've missed multiple weeks and large months of no content, so I can't figure out mine for shit. 4.
So it's just about 4 years. We're coming on 4. In terms of podcasting,
that's a huge milestone.
Really, the second wave, like the first wave was definitely like Marin and Never Not Funny with Jimmy Pardo. I think Scott, definitely first wave. Would you say that was the first class?
I think so. I actually sat here in anticipation, waiting to hear if I could actually hear Scott through the microphone. But I mean, Marin kills it. Marin is like Mark Marin is a huge influence on this particular podcast, and it's all because of a small bonus episode that he did that I actually had to take off of iTunes and save as an MP3, and I have it on all of my mobile devices as inspiration. but it was him talking at the key, talking at a comedy festival. It's like a 20-minute speech that he posted, where he talks about how podcasting saved his life. I think so. Yes.
Was this from Montreal?
And at the time, the Saint Mort Show had been on like a decent size hiatus. I had just left LA, and prior, the show was very inspired by like Comedy Bang Bang and the Paul F. Tomcast. I would have like 5 or 6 different guests, and I played all these different characters, and it was like a giant late night talk show, and it was just grinding me down, and I was like, oh, this is so much work, and there's no payoff for it, and blah, 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 blah. And then I remember listening to that speech, and there's a line in there where he says, talking to other people is what saved my life. And I thought back to all the prior episodes that I recorded where I was so set on, like, I want to get 5 guests on 1 hour long show, so after 10 minutes we have to cut the conversation. That there was no conversation. It was just a series of 10-minute commercials. And that was kind of where I was like, you know what, I just like talking to people. I know that it's going to hurt me because I'm not going to have a distinctly unique podcast. It's just going to be a dude talking to people. But, it was more important to me to spend an hour to get to know people and get to hear their lives and hear what drives them, and hopefully that would feed me with the desire to keep pushing forward and give me that drive. And I am always thankful that I continue doing that. But what was the origin story for something like Who Charted?
Who Charted was when Scott started Earwolf. Kind of went out to a select group of comedians and just like, hey, pitch me ideas. We're going to, there's this thing called podcasting. Howard took up the call and kind of was like, oh, it'd be fun for me to talk about music. And originally I wasn't involved. I think he made 2 pilots with the guests. Both pilots, the guest was Steve Agee. I think in the beginning he did like top 10 in movies and music, and he didn't even have like sound cues. They would just talk about it. And I think it was just like, it was a show. He was just like shitting on everything. And then I think Scott was like, I think you need somebody to kind of like have like somebody like a chart keeper, like a Kelly to your Regis, or someone like kind of moves things forward. I think Scott just probably looked up and saw me and was like, what about Kulap?
And in the cinematic version of this, you're in your pajamas eating cereal. And you look up with milk spilling out of your mouth, like, oh.
Yeah. Exactly. That's right. My hair is in curlers. We did one episode, and it was just like, it's sort of just like, something was there. Now, the show has changed, I think, quite a bit as our relationship has evolved, as we figured out what has worked and what hasn't.
Because just like a TV show, you can't judge a TV show by its pilot. Like, you can't judge a podcast from its first 20 or 30 episodes at all.
Something even almost the first year. Well, no, that's not fair. Yeah, that's true. I think it became something else, and we had our growing pains and our arguments, and where we're at now, it's just it's so great. It's so fun. I look forward to it. It's just having this podcast has just been, it's been a game changer for me. To have been just an actor and somebody who thought that who I am was not good enough. So I would even try to, when I get an audition, just be like, okay, this is what they want. I got to be what they want. And to have a podcast where I am accepted as just showing up as me. I mean, it's done wonders for my confidence. I've met so many great people. And Howard and I mean, he's like family. He's I say he's like my drunk uncle, younger brother.
I think that, for me, just having something that I know that I have to work on once a week definitely helps through, those slow periods. I had someone talk to me once about, I've been trying to get the same movie off the ground for about 5 years. And we thought that we were going to start shooting in September finally. We're like, oh, things are finally going to work out. And then something else happened that had to push it back 6 months. And in the past, having a podcast, that drove me nuts. And instead it was just like, well, at least I can focus on getting, like, all right, that sucks, but I still, have an interview I got to do and edit and get out by Friday. So, like, it was this nice, like, something to distract me from the disappointment of things having to be put on hold once again on something that I'm really passionate about. I think that that's what's really cool about podcasts is that the audience thinks that they're getting a lot out of it, but I don't think they're getting nearly as much as the actual podcaster ends up getting out of it. I think if every person on the planet had a podcast, I would probably subscribe to every single one of those because I'm just so fascinated by people and their stories.
Well, I just feel like Howard and I today had we're gonna have a segment on the last call with Carson Daly, and one of the questions that was posed to us was, do you think there's too many podcasts? And Howard was like, yes. He was like, yes, there should be a hook. There should be, it could be. And I go a different route. I think I don't, because what's it to anybody? It's not like, it's not like, it's so democratic. It's so, it's podcasts for the people. So as a creative person, if you have something to say, there's no reason why you shouldn't be podcasting. It's you as a creative person, you have to create and you have to show your work, and you have to be getting better. And I think a podcast is a perfect way to connect with people and to work out ideas and try new things. It's a medium where it's just your sweat for the most part. It's not a huge investment for the most part. No more than any other sort of creative endeavor is, I think. And if you have the potential of reaching
no one's forcing you to subscribe to other people's podcasts. I'm not subscribed to any sports podcast. Yeah, but it's not something I care about.
Yeah.
But, like, for my roommate, that might be the only thing he subscribes to. Like, God knows he doesn't listen to my shit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a beautiful thing, I think. Like, there's just so many ways that you can... But to me, as a comedian, as a writer, as a performer, like, you should have a podcast. Kind of
when I was first considering doing it, a good friend of mine, the guy who runs Geekscape, Jonathan, said to me, he was like, I'll host the show. Like, if your fear is where can you host it, I'll put it on the website. But he's like, if you consider yourself a writer, there's no reason to not have another outlet to get your name further out there. Like, it's, I've got the blog, and the blog's doing really well, and now I've got this, now as I'm nearing 100 episodes, I have a podcast, and that's doing relatively well, and it's like, that's awesome. Like, it's, more people know who I am now than before I had a blog or a podcast. Even if it's only 10 people that know me now, it's still more than I would have had without them. Because God knows iTunes doesn't really let you know how many subscribers you have. No.
Oh, does it? Like, look, we're all putting our hours in to become, like, I don't know, to master something, and you can't, like, you gotta put those hours in. You gotta work. You gotta be okay to, like, fail, but it's, like, the most important thing is trying. And, like, I love, like, that saying of, like, there's no failing, it's only education.
I've never heard that before, but that's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, well, because you get hard on yourself, like, stupid, you should have done it this way, like, you should quit. whatever it is, just quit. Like, but you go, no, like I learned so much. And that's the thing about blogs and podcasts and doing videos on YouTube or Funny or Die. It's like, it's playing and figuring things out and like figuring out what your voice is. There's so few people that just like, yeah, I know who I am and I go. And yeah, I know we've seen people like that, but guess what? It's not who we are. Let's just figure it out on our own time.
What's going to be the thing that people get attached to? Like I have two big examples from my own life. But the most popular episode of this podcast was way back in I think it was episode 46, when I had my brother on the podcast to celebrate his 1 year of sobriety. And he did a 2-hour conversation about his struggles with addiction. And my brother is a complete nobody. Like, he's just a dude. That's my brother. And that episode had more downloads and more shares than any other episode because it was something that people related to and people gravitated towards and wanted to share with their friends, is this really funny but inspirational story from a kid who I love and think is hilarious. And today, I officially have a new most popular blog entry, and it was something that I didn't think anyone would care about. I was just thinking about when I used to walk around in video stores and be terrified of the movie covers. So I did a blog of the 10 most terrifying VHS movie covers of my childhood. And it's been read like 20,000 times in 24 hours. I was like, this is insane. Like you never know when that lightning is going to strike at the right time, or when you have something that other people are going to gravitate towards and say, oh my God, this is, I know what this person's talking about.
Well, both those things are just like so uniquely to you and to your family and to your brother. And it's like, it's not a regurgitation or like a tag onto something else. It truly just is something that is inherently what
and my brother,
you've gone
the
through.
thing that made that episode really popular, I think, was that my brother, I always tell people that if they want to hear how the show should always be, that's the episode to listen to, which sucks because I had the most sound issues possible on that episode. But he's so funny in his sincerity. And there's a point where he talks about how, like I make a joke about how, he said something about how he drank and got with and started doing drugs because he thought it would help him get girls. And I made a comment about how, like, well, you've certainly been with more girls than me, so it obviously worked. And his comeback was that I've been with a lot of girls, but it's kind of like if I went to the grocery store and only bought Hot Pockets. And it's like it was such a bizarre analogy. But, like, I've had, like, 7 or 8 different people who've listened to that episode be like, dude, that Hot Pockets comment was one of the funniest things I ever heard. So it's like,
it's really funny, even in the retelling. I love that.
It's such a unique thing to just randomly use as your analogy to explain drug addiction. So yeah, I do feel bad.
I feel bad for those Hot Pockets,
but I don't think they were listening. But I mean, even him being on the show was the first time that I found out that he stole my mom's wedding ring and pawned it. I never knew that. Like, that was, at that moment, he admitted that on the podcast to me. And it was such a weird moment because he said it offhand. He was like, yeah, I went from, like, stealing change and video games to mom's wedding ring and other stuff. And then I was like, you stole mom's wedding ring? And there was this moment of silence, and he just goes, I was hoping you didn't notice me saying that. We could just move past it, but it's out there now, so yes. And, like, went into the story of it. And it was, like, it's just such a... It's such a raw episode, and I get so angry when I listen to it because the microphones don't work right. But, like, it gets me so angry. I was like, oh my God, if these microphones worked, maybe this could have been nominated for some type of podcasting award one day. But instead, it's just... I don't know. Every once in a while, people are like, hey, vote for some awards I've never heard of. Well, it's been a little over an hour. So the Indiegogo campaign, I'm going to get this out like in the next hour to try to get this. Yeah, I'm going to try to get this out there as quickly as possible. Quick? So, how many days are left on the campaign?
Okay, let me tell you that right now. Let's see, pulling up. We have. Oh, okay. We have. All right. Where would it say? Oh, we have 14 days left.
And how are things going with it so far?
So far, we have. Okay, we are 45% funded.
We got 14 days. Listeners out there, you can get it to you can get that extra 55%, and then I can see what might be one of the best documentaries of the year. Thank you so much for joining me, Kulap. Everyone, make sure you go on her Indiegogo campaign and click that donate button. Is there any cool-ass perks that they get for donating?
I think one of the coolest, well, you can get a set visit to a half-day set visit with 2 of your friends to It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I think that's major. Another huge one is you can appear and say a line on IFC's Comedy Bang Bang. That means you could, enter into you get residual. You get paid for being in it. You'd get residuals. That's on TV. Awesome. I think that's pretty sweet.
I had a past guest on here, and I don't know how this worked out, but the one of the perks on getting his record made was that he would make you an official producer of the album and give you 10% of all the sales after he made back the money that he spent on it. And I'm like, that's pretty awesome.
Wow.
Like, that's a pretty insane perk
that's
to give out.
That's pretty great.
And, like, obviously that was limited to, like, 10 people. But,
I see,
thank you so much. Where can people check out more information about you and the documentary and Who Charted and all that good stuff?
Well, for me, I have a website. It's my full name, kulapvilaysack.com. Who Charted, you can go to the Earwolf Network, look up our show. Go to originstorydoc.com for just information about a little bit about me, certainly about the project, and there's a link right there into our Indiegogo campaign.